Howdy, this is NC State Dendrology coming to you from outside of Biltmore Hall. Sorry about the traffic noise from Western Boulevard, but here we are in front of a giant longleaf pine specimen tree. So that was planted out here. It's not doing super well. This is not the general habitat where it grows, but this is a great way to see one that's on campus, that's a mature tree. So how do you identify longleaf pine? Well, so they're not joking when they're talking about the leaves being long, right? So Pinus palustris, palustris means swamp. It often grows in very wet, moist sites. The foliage is as long as my forearm. That was not an exaggeration or joke. And the needles are clustered in 3 needles per fascicle. So similar to loblolly, but you can see the foliage is twice as long. Longleaf pine also has very large cones. This particular one is not very large. Like I said, this tree is not super happy here. But generally they're twice the size, easily twice the size of loblolly pine cones. I would say, 8 inches up to a foot in length. So they're really, pretty robust cones. Longleaf pine is a really special species in North Carolina. It is the highest honor you can get as a civilian is the Order of the Longleaf Pine. It's also mentioned in our state toast, "Here's to the land of the longleaf pine." And this species is reduced to 3% of its former range. So longleaf pine used to be the dominant species of the southeastern coastal plain, but has been replaced by loblolly pine specifically because of fire suppression. So that means putting out any fires that come along rather than letting them burn naturally. At one time, people thought that putting out these fires was a bad thing to do because it impacted the resource. So now we know that longleaf pine is very specially adapted to fire. In fact, it's a very poor competitor in general. So having these fire adaptations doesn't necessarily mean that the species thrives in fire. What it means more is that the frequent fire knocks back the competition that allows longleaf pine to survive. So for the first several years of its life, longleaf pine exists as a grass stage. It looks like a little bundle of pine needles, right? This is just one, but imagine a whole clump of them that are sitting on the ground, and they're protecting this bright white bud. So I'm going to bring this in so you can see the bright white bud. Right, so that white bud is a diagnostic character for longleaf pine. Loblolly pine has golden buds. And as it sits in the grass stage, low-level fires can burn right over top of it. This long lush foliage ends up protecting that bud from fire. And so the tree can just sprout new foliage after a fire, but importantly, all the other competition that's around it gets knocked back. And so longleaf will survive while other species go away. And so that's part of its competitive advantage. After a few years, it sends down a long taproot, and the tree kind of bursts and grows very, very quickly to adult size. So at that point, I like calling it the Dr. Seuss tree. It has these big, long clusters of needles at the ends of these blunt branches. And it's really something to see. We have lots of photos in our lecture slides showing what that looks like as longleaf comes out of the grass stage into a mature tree. At that point, the bark is pretty thin, and so it is vulnerable to fire, but that's just a short period of time before it grows into a large tree. As a large and mature tree, it does have very thick bark that is fire resistant. So fire is integral to longleaf pine, and that's one of the reasons why longleaf pine is so rare. Another reason was during colonial times, people grazed animals, they didn't put fences, they just grazed them out in the wilderness, and that thick, fleshy, starchy bud was sought after by hogs. So hog grazing really impacted the regeneration of new stands. And then this species is an important species for the naval stores industry. So naval stores produce tar, pitch, turpentine was another, which was used as an illuminant. And that industry really thrived. North Carolina was the biggest producer of naval stores up through the Civil War when that market crashed. Turpentine was replaced by kerosene, and you can still see these scarred old trees in old growth areas where they have this cat face kind of scarring, right? Cuts were made so that the resin could drip down into collecting devices, and then it was boiled down either to make tar, or if it was boiled further, it made pitch, which is solid at room temperature. or it could be distilled and made into turpentine. So that industry really had a high impact on the longleaf pine. Once after the Civil War came, right, and railroads became developed through the 1800s, late 1800s, suddenly these stands of virgin timber were accessible, and the species was logged, right, and then replaced by agriculture. So the species really only occupies 3% of its former range, but it's truly a magnificent tree. I wish I could take you to the coast to show you longleaf pine in its natural habitat. It is being restored and is grown still in North Carolina in large swaths around Fort Bragg, the military base, and also in the Croatan National Forest. So that's longleaf pine, Pinus palustris in the Pinaceae family, our longleaf pine.